What's up, YouTube? Capital G here, giving you guys a quick card discussion on one of my favorite, kind of low-key, under-the-radar tech choices for this format. This is a card that I think is absolutely amazing against a multitude of the meta decks. It's a Floodgate that can really shut down a lot of what's being played right now at the highest levels of competition, and we actually did see this card at the top tables at YCS Sydney. I'm talking about the top cut and further, but nothing really came of it. No one really talked about it that much in the Yu-Gi-Oh community. The card did not see an increase in play or an increase in price because it is a fairly old card, but don't worry, it's a card that currently is about $3.50 odd cents, so it's not something that's very expensive, and it's a Floodgate, so it obviously has the ability to shut down people for a prolonged amount of time, multiple turns, which is obviously really good. What exactly am I talking about? The card I'm talking about is Summon Limit. This is a continuous trap card. It's super old school, so I'm just going to quickly explain it because it came out originally in Light of Destruction, so you're talking about a card that's over a decade old. Some of the newer players might not even know of this card's existence, and I think that it hasn't actually been, it hasn't been reprinted in over 5 or 6 years, so it's been a little while since you've actually been able to just open up a pack and, bust one of these things open. But Summon Limit is a continuous trap card. It says neither player can summon more than 2 times per turn. Negated summons count toward this limit. Negated cards/effects that would summon do not. So essentially, when it comes to kind of the negations and how they do or do not count towards the limit, it means that if your opponent activates something like Monster Reborn and you go spell it, it would not count towards the limit of 2. However, if your opponent tries to summon like a Prankatrops and you use a Solemn Warning or a Solemn Judgment or even a Solemn Strike or something like that, that actually would count towards the limit. So at this point, you're probably wondering, how is Summon Limit good? What applications are there for it, Cap? How exactly am I going to beat the meta? What is it good for? And essentially, it's a card that kind of is a hard counter to the Link Summon as a whole. It's just kind of a hindrance, especially if your opponent is looking to Link Climb. I kind of feel like this card doesn't just do a good job at countering a lot of what's being done in the metagame right now. It's just kind of like a counter to Master Rule 4 as a whole. When you look at Master Rule 4, you have to identify, obviously, Link monsters are by far the most generic when it comes to the extra deck monsters. They don't need tuners, they don't have to match up the levels, none of that stuff kind of matters. As long as you can just throw a bunch of monsters on the field, easily you can just summon something like Sorry Just Skull Dread. But what this card allows you to do is essentially just tell your opponent, you are restricted to 2 summons for the entire turn, and it doesn't matter what you want to do after that, it's just not going to happen, and that counters completely the entire theory or the entire concept of, number one, link climbing. But really, when you think about it in practical applications, a lot of times your opponent's not even going to be able to get a link monster on field. When you think about Yu-Gi-Oh right now, how many meta decks are actually playing incredibly valuable link ones? Maybe Altergeist, because going into Link Karibo for them means Miluseek activates the effect and it gets their deck going, or maybe Sky Striker because their bread and butter is link ones, but that's pretty much it. If you flip over a Summon Limit and your opponent is limited to, just 2 summons for the rest of the turn, well, they're not going to be able to even get a Link 2 on the field because you're going to use one monster, obviously, that has to put itself on the field, whether it's special summoned or whether it's normal summoned, fair enough. You summon another monster and you think, Cap, now I got my 2 monsters on field, I can go for my Link 2, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. No, you've used your 2 summons at that point, you can no longer Link summon, so maybe you can go for a Link 1 and then have an additional monster on the field. But again, unless you're playing something like Sky Striker, most decks are not going to be able to have an impactful Link 1 that's going to be able to counter this card or that's going to be able to put them in a winning position. This card is also super good against any deck that runs the danger. So you guys know right now, token generating cards and cards that can just special summon themselves kind of freely, extenders like the dangerous cards that put themselves on the field essentially for no resources, they are all the rage. It's the reason we see these token generating cards getting hit on the ban list, but people still continue to play them, whether it be Phantom Skyblaster or Scapegoat, etc, etc. When the danger monsters, you consolidate your hand, just vomit all over the field. But the thing is, those cards are generally used as a means to an end. That end is generally cards like Saryuja Skull Dread or Summon Sorceress. But if you have Summon Limit on the field, it's going to be near impossible for your opponent to get something like a Summon Sorceress or a Saryuja Skull Dread out on the board before, maybe turn 3 or something like that. And that just kind of assumes that your opponent's not actively trying to get rid of your monsters, which obviously they're going to be. And really, when you look at the competitive landscape of Yu-Gi-Oh, a lot of the meta decks, like a lot of the decks that see play in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, kind of start out small. They use a lot of small monsters to basically get to bigger monsters, whether it's link climbing or Xyz summoning, etc., etc. You think about decks like Salamangreat or Burning Abyss, Luna Lights, and these other decks, Prank Kids. What if you could just limit them to 2 summons? Is your opponent ever going to be able to get to a Dante and extend upon their board if they only have 2 summons to work with? Same thing goes with Salamangreats. Yeah, you get your normal summon. You want to go into Banlinks? Okay, well, that's basically it for your turn. You're never getting to your actual plays. A lot of these decks need so many summons to get into their boss monsters. Luna Lights with the dangers and with the constant summoning off Luna Light Tiger, etc., etc., that summon limit just shuts them down, and your opponent's always left generally with like a fractured board. Even if your opponent does have those big boss monsters like Colossus, where it only takes 1 monster to summon it, chances are your opponent has to get a Thunder monster on field, then they have to activate a Thunder monster in their hand, and even if that all comes together without being countered, your opponent just ends on 1 Colossus and that's it. And we all know that that is not ideal for a Thunder Dragon deck. And I really thought about this outside of the box too, because I knew that people were going to say, well, Cap, why not just run Gozen Match and Rivalry of Warlords? And those are obviously excellent cards. You flip over Gozen Match against Prank Kids or something like Obliterates, it's basically a free win. You have Rivalry of Warlords against like Luna Lights or, Thunder Dragons, basically any deck that plays Danger. Hell, if you flip it over against Burning Abyss, they can't even go into Dante, which sucks for them. Those cards can be incredibly powerful. However, one big flaw that Gozen Match and Rivalry have is that there are decks out there like Salamangreat. There are decks out there like Cyber Dragons where the entire deck is like 1 attribute, and it also happens to be, just 1 type. Against Salamangreats, people flip over Gozen Match or Rivalry on me, and I just start laughing. I'm like, that card doesn't do anything. And yes, those are 2 kind of obscure matchups, but they do actually come up. Now, right about now, you might be wondering, well, where exactly can I run this? What decks can use this card effectively, Cap? But I think that this card has really good applications in decks that don't need to special summon all that much. Think about Obliterates. We know that a lot of them are running Rivalry of Warlords, but again, that doesn't really do anything if you run into a Salamangreat deck. That doesn't do anything if you happen to duel against Cyber Dragons. If you happen to run Summon Limit instead, we know that Obliterates don't really need to special summon that much, and Obliterates, the most special summoning you're really going to be doing is what? Probably off a Multi-Faker, but Obliterates don't really need to extend that much more. Let's say you're playing against Thunder Dragons and you do happen to summon a Multi-Faker. Dude, as long as you get Sequidius or Milusik, you're pretty much good. Those are your 2 removal cards, and you don't need that much more special summoning to beat your opponent, especially considering how slow their deck's going to be operating. I think that this card can be tremendous in something like Guru Control, because Guru Control pretty much doesn't special summon at all. They summon 1 monster in a turn that generally is going to be Guru. Maybe they summon the other behemoth dude from their hand, but that's pretty much it. If you play this in Guru Control, you're going to be unaffected 99.9% of the duel, because they don't even run any like monster. They don't run any special summon extender cards like Monster Reborn or anything like that. And as odd as this is going to sound, Summon Limit is actually quite amazing in Thunder Dragons, which, is actually a little ironic, because I feel like Thunder Dragons are hurt by just about every meta deck's Floodgates, whether it be Rivalry of Warlords or Gozen Match, or, there can only be 1. Meta decks will generally side those cards in against Thunder Dragons, and Thunder Dragons don't really have a natural fit for like Floodgates. They don't have a card that they can kind of go to. However, if you can just make your normal kind of Thunder Dragon board, doesn't have to be anything crazy. It can just be a Titan and a Colossus, just 1 copy of each, or even just double Colossus. This card will be amazing, because a lot of those common monsters that are used to kind of counter the Thunder Dragon fusion monsters, whether they be Borlo Dragon, or if you're playing Luna Lights, you might go for the Fire Fist Tiger King. Salamangreats, we usually go for the Mirage Stallion. None of those cards can be made with just 2 summons during a turn, and what happens essentially is the Thunder Dragon player, sure, they can expand upon their board, but they just beat you to death with the couple of big fusion monsters that they have on the field, and they never really need to put anything more than that, because you can never get over those monsters with just 2 summons in a turn. So I think this card is really good. Again, I love the fact that if you you are playing it in kind of a trap deck, an anti-meta deck like Altergeist or something maybe like Guru Control, I love the fact that if you solemn a monster, you actually get that counted as towards the limit, which means your opponent only gets one summon for the rest of the turn. And I just feel like this card is actually pretty valuable. It's not a card that actually breaks boards though, so maybe that's one reason that people don't use it as much. But you know, Jesse Cotton did actually run this in Thunder Dragons at YCS Sydney. It just never really caught on because it is a card that you kind of have to see within the first couple of turns for it to be effective, and it's not something you can really ever play if you are going second. So if you play this card, you do need to be going first. But whatever you guys think of Summon Limit, leave it in the comment section below. It's just another option for those of you guys who are looking for some really good Floodgate choices. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already and turn on that notification bell for daily videos.